Hello, this is an astrology video for January 2018. My name's Michael Conneely and we're filming just around the corner from the healing centre I run with Maggie Pashley. And the first weekend of every month we're putting out a video and blog magazine called Astrology and Healing Magazine. So this is the first issue. And indeed it starts off with revolution, because the first planet I'm going to talk about is Uranus. Now, just after the start of January 2018, Uranus comes on station. It has been retrograding and it comes to a standstill. And that's at virtually 0 Vedic Aries, or 24 Western Aries. And planets, the slower a planet's velocity, the more powerful its effect. And so then Uranus starts to go forward again and picks up speed and moves quite quickly through Vedic Aries from January. But there is great power in this standstill. And the standstill at the start of Vedic Aries is of course in the Gandanta zone, the very immaterial and inspirational point where water signs in Vedic astrology change into fire signs. So when Pisces, the water of Pisces dissolves away and there's a void, and then the first flicker of fire of Aries, and that's where Uranus is. And so for people who have planets in this area, or any of the 3 Gandanta zones, it will be very inspirational. But you have to remember that Uranus's energy is driven, it's electric, it's lightning. And so that, for example, can make you stay awake at night. It could make you quite driven and irritable with other people. So I'm sorry about that. But above all, it's inspirational. I incidentally have my moon literally here and my sun literally opposite, and I felt the inspiration coming in bursts, like sunbeams through the trees in a forest, something like that. Tremendously inspirational. So be open to the inspiration if you have planets at the end of Vedic Pisces, at the beginning of Vedic Aries, or opposite at the beginning of Vedic Libra. But it's not just that. You see, wherever Uranus is, if he's square Uranus in your birth chart, so for a youngster aged 21, that youngster has their first Uranus square revolution. So it's also how, it's not just in the degrees I mentioned, it's also how Uranus aspects Uranus in your birth charts. So be open to the inspiration, but watch out for the risk that you could treat yourself or other people somewhat drivenly or impatiently. And so, of course, Uranus is now established, transiting forward into Vedic Aries. Well, Uranus's orbit is 84 years. What happened last time Uranus entered Vedic Aries? Okay, this is quite serious. It was the burning of the Reichstag. It was the rise of Adolf Hitler. It was the invasion of Poland with no declaration of war. That is the energy of Uranus in Aries at its most terrible. So let's hope the world doesn't have that sort of manifestation of this new transit of Uranus into Vedic Aries. Okay, let's move now to focus on Saturn. Well, Saturn has recently gone through a Gandanta zone too, the one from Vedic Scorpio to Vedic Sagittarius. And Saturn starts the month at 7 degrees Vedic Sagittarius and ends the month at 17 degrees Vedic Sagittarius. And so in fact at the beginning of the month, Saturn is in Mula Nakshatra. Mula Nakshatra, the 19th lunar sign, is ruled over by Niriti, the goddess of death and destruction. She dances a sort of graveyard dance of death and rebirth. Well, how different from Saturn? Because Saturn, well, negatively, is your scripts, your tram lines, the prison cell you've built out of concrete that you call your world. And here is Saturn meeting the dark goddess with her death dance, her call to rebirth. And so in fact what you're called to do, all of us, is embrace opening to new possibility, embrace the growth of revolution, but at the same time honour Saturn's script, Lord Shani, Lord of Karma, of patience, structure, hard work, endurance. You have to ride two very different horses this month. And just a note, two important notes in fact. If Sagittarius is the 8th house from the sign occupied by your moon, that's Ashtamashani, and Saturn's transit through the 8th is tough. You need to be cherishing of yourself. Things will die. It's not a time to sort of take risks and be overactive. It's a time to contact inner strength, embody love, live carefully. That's Saturn transiting through the 8th house from your moon in your Vedic birth chart. And the other thing to be aware of when you look at Saturn now in Sagittarius in January 2018 is Sade Sate. Sade Sati is the 7.5 year period, roughly speaking, when Saturn goes through the sign before the moon in your birth chart, the sign of the moon, and the sign after the moon. So if you have your moon in Vedic Scorpio, Sagittarius or Capricorn, you're affected by Sadhisati. And Sadhisati is like going down into a pit, starting off with death and loss type experiences, maybe a big move of house. And Sadhisati involves us in a sense being cut off from God's grace. So part of it is that we see ourselves as we are. And the sighting of that can impel us to make growth, to heal and empower. And Sadhisati has very definite phases to it. The beginning, the middle and end are really tough. And in between, there can even be fool's paradise type phases where, we think, oh, things are much better than they actually are in terms of how we're handling our spiritual growth. So do have a Sadhisati reading from me if this applies to you. And the last point about Saturn I would make is that with Saturn transiting through Vedic Sagittarius, he's casting an opposition to Vedic Gemini. So if you have planets in Vedic Gemini, you'll be having Saturn oppositions. And it's good to sort of hear that, because that could explain why you're feeling very blocked or depressed, finding things really hard going. And again, have a reading to understand the message of Lord Shani, Lord of Karma, to you in your year ahead. Okay, well let's now move to the nodes of the moon. Rahu, the north node, Ketu, the south node. Well, Rahu entered Vedic Cancer at the time of those huge August 2017 eclipses. And so you need to understand what Rahu's transit for Cancer means for you. So in general terms, we might want, to be nurtured and looked after, Cancer type energy. But you have to look at the house in your Vedic birth chart which Vedic Cancer is. So if it's your first house, you'll be driven to express yourself in the world. And so, you need to understand how you would strategize and manage an increase in your expression in the world, how you'd balance that with relationship, because the 7th house is, of course, opposite. And if, for example, you have Sun in Vedic Cancer, well, you'd have a Rahu to Sun transit. And that will really make you want to achieve your standing in the world, express yourself and succeed. But again, you have to be careful that the drive of Rahu might be destabilizing or unkind. Rahu gives us drive to achieve, but if we don't purify his energy, we don't achieve what we should achieve. And also, let's bear in mind the issue of planets square the nodal axis, because this month Jupiter and Mars are both square that nodal axis of Rahu in Cancer, Ketu in Capricorn. And when a planet is square the nodal axis, it means there's a special call to us, if we have it in our birth chart, to work at the nature of that planet and how we manifest in our life, because the understanding is it was a missed step in our previous life or lives. So we particularly have to get it right this time. So for a child born in January 2018, they will have their Jupiter and Mars square the nodal axis, a spiritual evolutionary missed step. Have a natal chart interpretation for the child. Work out what that means in terms of their destiny, their incarnational life purpose, why they're here. And remember that on the 12th of January, Saturn is actually conjunct Mercury in the heavens in Vedic Sagittarius. And so indeed communication and IT organisation could be blocked. You could feel depressed. You could find it difficult to communicate. And so that will be quite a drab time just before and after the 12th of January. Okay, well, let's go through now to Jupiter. So Jupiter's transiting Vedic Libra in January 2018, and that will bring general growth in your relationships and your creativity. But you also need to look at which house Libra is in your Vedic birth chart. So for example, if it's your 4th house, well, you might move home beneficially. You might sort of decorate and improve your home. Things might get more lovely in your home. Look out for that. Go with it, boost it, work with it at this time. And of course, remember that as Jupiter's going through Libra, at the same time, Uranus is going through Vedic Aries, and so the two are in opposite signs to each other. And that is quite expansionary and quite lucky. So that's certainly worth considering, even though the actual orb of the opposition is wide by now. So, Mars. Well, Mars is not nice to manage all through 2018. And so for each of these monthly astrology and healing videos and blogs, we'll be looking carefully at what Mars is doing. But at the moment, Mars is going through Vedic Libra. So if you've got your Sun or you're in Vedic Libra, you might get quite irritable and angry. If you've got your ascendant there, again, you might be quite angry or driven or impatient, or of course you might have like an accident happen to you, or someone else could be really nasty to you. So that needs to be understood. And on January the 16th, Mars goes into the next sign, Vedic Scorpio. And so very, very different from being in Vedic Libra. Mars actually rules Scorpio. He's powerful, he's strong there. He'll bring real oomph to the affairs of the house in your chart that Scorpio is. But the energy of Scorpio obviously isn't easy. It's about secrets, buried hurts, and with Mars there, it could be, quite a tortuous experience, obscured agendas. And so try to be aware of that, try to keep clarity, try to keep strategy for the things you're doing when Mars is going through Scorpio. Okay, Venus. Well, Venus is in Vedic Sagittarius conjunct the Sun, and that's never good because the Sun combusts Venus, the Sun burns Venus. And so if you have that in your birth chart, it's not good for love, because your egoic self burns all the loving type energies, the gentle sweetness. But Venus transits on past the Sun from January the 9th. And indeed, at that time, Venus becomes the evening star. In other words, there's a sort of death and rebirth of Venusian qualities, of love and beauty. And look out for that, because this was a very big theme to the ancient Babylonians. And their myth was the descent of the goddess Inanna into the underworld, where she faced degradation and unhappiness before re-emerging. And that, in a sense, is what happens when Venus goes forward, passes the Sun and gets burned, and then is the beautiful evening star. Venus actually enters Vedic Capricorn on January the 14th. But there's a big sting in the tail, because on January the 31st there's an eclipse, and Venus is conjunct Ketu, the south node of the eclipse, exactly on January the 29th and on January the 31st, the day of the eclipse. And this is not at all easy for love. It's not at all easy for the expression of Venus to have Venus conjunct Ketu. Although, of course, Venus moves on and becomes more free as February progresses. Mercury. Well, Mercury enters Vedic Sagittarius on the 7th of January. He was in Vedic Sagittarius before, but then he did a big retrograde through the Gandanta zone into Scorpio, and then moved forward again. And he'll again be conjunct Saturn in the heavens on the 12th of January. So that will be a tricky time for Mercury, although not necessarily disadvantageous. It could be good for writing and so forth, because Venus is indeed in Sagittarius. The Sun. Well, the Sun is in Vedic Sagittarius, but on the 14th of January he enters Capricorn. And the Sun doesn't really do too well in Capricorn, because Capricorn is ruled by Saturn, and the two don't get on. Saturn brings blocks and lack of confidence, whereas the Sun wants to shine on high and give blessings to all. The Sun is the king of our kingdom. So this is a somewhat cautious Sun, but the person might well want to do very well in career and understand patience and hard work. So, the lunations, the phases of the moon. Full moon on January the 2nd. Well, that's in Ardra Nakshatra, and Ardra is ruled by fierce demonic Rahu, and the god is the storm god, Rudra. And I think the full moon on January the 2nd is a very difficult energy and will take some days to recover from. I mean, some people say, oh yes, Ardra is about, expressing yourself, so forth. But I think it's about turbulence and storm myself. And the full moon will carry that energy. Then there's a new moon on January the 17th. This is in Uttarashada Nakshatra. Ketu, the South Node in Capricorn. And then lastly, as I said, there's the eclipse on January the 31st. And I do think this looks very ghastly, to be honest. I would genuinely say for the day before and 2 days after the eclipse, don't plan in anything too challenging. Plan to be able to have an easy life with times for comfort and love. So the moon of the eclipse is in Ashlesha Nakshatra. Sun is in Shravana and the ascendant is in Ardra. And indeed there's another eclipse in Ashlesha on the 11th of August 2018. So for the eclipse on January the 31st, Ashlesha is eclipsed, and Ashlesha is serpent energy. At its best, it's sort of death and rebirth, it's shamanic. But often that is through things like fears, phobias, obsessions and compulsions, hurt energies. But as I said, potential for spiritual wisdom, potential for death and rebirth. So please, at the end of January, clear the decks, plan to sustain a calm environment for the day before the eclipse, the day of the eclipse, and the 2 days afterwards. So I hope this January summary has been helpful. And there's a blog which has the charts, tables for the ephemeris, tables for the lunation,